A Nightmare Before Christmas. Oogie's
Revenge is an artifact of a forgotten era of gaming where just about any animated movie had a small, low-budget tie-in game shipped off to a C-list game studio to promote its release, with a few small distinctions setting it apart from its contemporary dust collectors. It was developed and published a decade after the film it's based on released in theaters, and has the name of one of the oldest and most recognizable gaming titans stamped on the cover. Oh, and it's actually fun.
Ready?
Alright. Damn, that went on for a long time. I don't know how I did that.
Oogie's Revenge is a bit of an anomaly, a sort of middleman between the old 80s, 90s, and early 2000s style of video game companion piece cash grabs and the modern era of tie-in or franchise games, which are either big-budget, high-profile releases of cultural juggernauts, or just the absolute worst, trashiest asset-flip scourges that can melt your PC or console just by booting them up.
Look out!
You asked me to
Honestly, turn the stream off. We're done.
The game clearly has a little money behind it, bringing back a significant portion of the film's voice cast, licensing its music, rendering plenty of returning locations from the film and some distinct new ones, and being developed in-house by one of Capcom's smaller production teams. Releasing in 2004 on the PS2 in Japan, and then later in 2005 for the PS2 and Xbox worldwide during the seemingly eternal Nightmare Before Christmas mania that has gone nowhere in the 2 decades since, the strangest aspect to its development given the film's continued popularity is actually the developer's choice in genre: stylish action. It wasn't uncommon for licensed games to scoop out the innards of popular genres and dress them with the skin of whatever property they were adapting, but Oogie's Revenge differentiates itself by choosing a relatively young fringe genre at the time, known for intense action and exaggerated violence, as the bones of a game based on an animated movie easily enjoyed by children. 3D action and beat-em-up style games were far from a rarity on this generation of consoles, but the subgenre stylish action, or character action, or whatever you'd like to call them, often put heavier emphasis on efficient play, getting good, by ranking and rewarding the player's performance and creating separate categories for less essential systems like combo scores to guide the player towards a certain style of play. Done well, the ranking system can push the player towards understanding more unorthodox mechanics and provide an alternative goal besides bashing their way to the credits. Done poorly, it can demoralize and irritate the player and give them a sense of apathy towards the ranks, or even worse, push them to drop a game even faster. The bizarre choice to put all its chips in a very technical genre gives the game the feeling of an experimental playground for the developers to run in any direction they want with the game mechanics. Once you've committed to the genre and you're willing to run that risk of alienating fans of the movie, you may as well go all out. An essential feature of any stylish action game, and really any game with an emphasis on third-person combat, is the utilization of game mechanics that let you interact with enemies in more meaningful ways than just whacking them with whatever weapon the developers superglued to your hands. Launchers, enemy step, juggles, taunts, pulling in and tossing enemies away all make up the lubricant in the combat machine that keeps its gears from getting rusty and stagnating. Oogie's Revenge was criticized at the time for apparently not offering much complexity. Movement is restricted to just walking, dodging, and context-sensitive grapple points. There's no jumping or air combos or variety in the basic attacks of any sort. The perceived lack of combat depth in a game whose bread and butter is horde fights against simple enemies designed for filling a combo meter is a large factor as to what gave the title its reputation as a watered-down Devil May Cry, which, while not entirely unwarranted, ignores the more nuanced ways the player is able to interact with the game's enemies even with its shallow moveset.
Yeah!
Jack can grab enemies, slam them down, toss them into other enemies, draw them in, and launch them flying across the room, and the game gives you a lot of freedom in how you chain these abilities together, choosing to make enemies defeatable without strictly requiring specific strategies. This gives a more skilled player the flexibility to approach combat encounters and manage the hordes of no-clip ghosts and lesser bone daddies without locking them into rock-paper-scissors type scenarios, where one attack or ability is the only solution to defeat a certain enemy. The crown jewel of the system mechanics, though, has to be the game's implementation of taunts. Jack can charge up the Soul Robber, the green gelatin that acts as the game's main weapon, with either the attack or the grab button for some spooky bonus effects. A damage buff to your next combo string, and turning your next grab into a twirly vacuum attack that can decimate whole rooms of foes, respectively. Taking the time to charge, though, leaves you vulnerable to attacks and runs the risk of letting the combo meter drop to 0. It's something you'll be choosing to avoid in the middle of a fight. Performing a successful taunt in an enemy's face with the D-pad, however, cover will instantly charge the Soul Robber as if you had held the button, giving you much quicker access to your most powerful attacks. A well-timed taunt also has the secondary effect of surprising nearby enemies and potentially interrupting their attacks, which Jack will have to get right in front of to activate this successfully. This speeds up the flow of combat considerably, adds much needed risk and reward, and on a more meta level adds to your exclamation mark count, which the game makes a point of scoring you on at the end of each chapter. In addition to your clear time, maximum combo, and damage taken, the developers added a rank just for making Jack look as cocky as possible. The game utilizes the chapter and grading structure very well here, giving the player positive reinforcement every time you taunt. Number go up, nab better rank, and therefore more cash, which motivates you to experiment with taunts and better learn the game's combat. The trade-off of the taunt is its guarantee to piss off enemies and power them up to their enraged forms. Every non-boss enemy in the game has a glowy neon evil form that they mutate into when you taunt them, making them more aggressive, often doubling their movesets, and just generally making them more aggravating to deal with. Of course, taunted enemies also drop more souls, which is why the bulk of the footage in this video features the empowered enemies regardless of how much pressure they add to a fight. The player even has the freedom to get overzealous with the mechanic and taunt low health enemies, a risky play as they'll recover at least half of it after they transform. Well, okay, it's not actually that risky, it's actually pretty easy. The amount of depth the developers were able to stretch out of such a limited moveset through the unique taunt system is commendable, though with the way these mechanics are presented in the game itself, it's hard to blame players for not engaging with the game at the level it encourages. Dumping a bunch of optional text descriptions in the pause menu to explain the bulk of Jack's moveset the moment the player is given control is probably the worst way to introduce the bones of the combat system. It'd be like showing up for your first day of work at a new job and your boss drops a stack of paperwork on the corner of your desk before you sit down. When you do sit down, the chair is made of staples. Almost worse than starting you off with busy work lest you succumb to being inferior is the game going out of its way to make your basic combos and button mashing not very fun. Your attacks start off neutered, and you only unlock any proper combo finishers with shop upgrades. There's also no way to vary your normal attacks, pauses, mixing light and heavy attacks, DMC2 directional stick garbage, there's none of that. Top tier action games tend to have way more variety in their combat from the get-go and manage to make mashing out even basic button combos more flashy and instantly gratifying to hook the player in without it being so good as to become the dominant strategy. Compare any of these examples to this. This genre is already fighting an uphill battle getting players to care about and utilize all their tools. Extra positive feedback goes a long way towards getting the player invested. The game feel and control, though, is for the most part spot on, assisted by the fantastic animation and posing, which makes simple actions like attacking and dodging satisfying to pull off, and the okay character models, which manage to preserve the film's character designs even if some of the charm is lost with the change in medium. Jack, in particular, looks amazing as a stylish action protagonist with minimal changes to his design. Just some green jello as an accessory. Is that sentient skeleton twink wearing a dessert on his wrist? The absurdity of casting Jack Skellington as the protagonist in a genre known for intense, high-speed action starts to wane the more you play, and after enough exposure, even makes sense. Jack himself is a very theatrical character with a big personality, exaggerated lanky proportions, swimming in theater kid energy. He's just a bit of a weirdo, isn't he? It's not uncommon for these titles to have charismatic and extra protagonists to make them more endearing and complement the wackiness of the scenarios found in the genre. Jack ends up fitting snugly in his role as quirked up action protagonist, with his mannerisms in the cutscenes giving off that cheeky brand of confidence without betraying the character's kindness, his curiosity, or determination. The quick, elegant dodges Jack uses to navigate the bony battlefield are another example of... Hey, wait a sec. There is a particular facet of Jack's character that goes mostly overlooked. He's the Pumpkin King.
I am the Pumpkin King!
In a literal sense, this comes up quite a bit. The characters in Oogie's Revenge are more than happy to bring up Jack's title, both inconsequentially and in the greater narrative. Oogie's plot for revenge is to essentially usurp Jack as the Seven Holiday King, but the fact he earned that title by being the most crying mofo in a town crawling with the scariest creatures imaginable goes unacknowledged. In the film, Jack has plenty of moments demonstrating just how terrifying he can be, stalking into people's homes, using long, spindly legs to crawl around like a spider, screaming like a banshee. These are nowhere to be found, and when the game does try to recreate Jack's fright factor, it looks like this. It's a little bit disappointing to see that aspect of his character, especially in a Halloween-themed series, watered down in this way. though there is one animation that does come close to recapturing some of Jack's creep factor. Ah! Jesus, Jack, that is not how you talk to a child. You do it like this.
Die 1,000 deaths! I am the Pumpkin King!
Jack's weapon of choice in this game is the
Soul Robber!
a little twitching pile of goo synthesized by Dr. Finkelstein. It's not really given much context in the world. The game needed a weapon for Jack, and the game developers wanted grabbing and throwing things to be the game's most prominent mechanic.
Amazing!
So it's just a thing the Doctor gives him when Jack gets deterred from the repetitiveness of the town's Halloween celebration again. Revisiting The Nightmare Before Christmas reveals how unexplored some of the character relationships go in the movie, especially between Jack and Oogie, who is the kind of main antagonist of the film. He has shockingly little screen time given how iconic the character is, only getting an introduction in the latter half to sing a song about being evil and to torture Sandy Claus. Oogie lives on the outskirts of town and Jack doesn't want him involved because he's a bad dude. That's about all the audience gets. The scene where Jack saves Sally and Sandy and unravels Oogie's scheme, I'm very clever, is literally the first scene in the movie that they're in the same room together or talk to each other at all. The sequel game shifts its focus to deliver a more suitable and satisfying story for the change in medium. Oogie is back and has real beef with Jack after being melted by him in the film. The Pumpkin King strolls back into his domain on Christmas Eve, having been gone 2 months, and everything is turned on its head. No denizens of Halloween Town are around except for these suspicious new skeletons. Oogie has completely taken over and is more ambitious than ever. He has plans of grandeur and vengeance, leaving everyone in the town scared and confused, and Jack returning to put everything back in order. Oogie actually confronts Jack as early as the first level and is the introduction of another of the game's high points: the boss fights. The encounter seems slow at first, set to his own steady theme from the film, with Oogie marching around the town hall, making half-hearted attempts to crush you under giant dice. It is very neat that you can reflect his projectiles back in it with good timing. That's fun to pull off. But you'll quickly notice that the glowing objects flinging out of him on damage aren't the game's currency, but soul notes. These fill up your dance gauge, which then starts a countdown until
Ready?
3, 2, 1. Let's dance!
the game becomes a rhythm title mid-fight, giving the player the opportunity to deal ludicrous damage and theater kids the opportunity to finally experience what a rap battle is like. The sudden genre switch is certainly jarring the first time the camera suddenly cuts away to Jack busting it down with his backup dancers, completely switching the focus from third-person beat-em-up combat to rigidly timed button pressing and allowing your ears to hone in on the new original lyrics created from the movie's soundtrack. These lyrics fit the context of the conflicts happening in the game much better, but are definitely nothing special on the whole. At best, they're harmless. At worst, they may drive fans of the film completely insane. These dance battle segments could be criticized for forcing the player to disengage with the rest of the game and focus on skills that are completely divorced from the game's combat, even being able to repeat twice in one fight, becoming especially tedious on replays of already finished levels. But it's just so hard not to appreciate them. If you're going to adapt a musical to a game centered around combat, it's only sensible to blend the two together, and it also contributes to the game's unique identity as this bizarre, once-in-a-lifetime crossover of two genres that have seemingly no business together. On a gameplay level, the player also has some agency in how quickly they collect notes in order to either prevent the dance segments from triggering multiple times, or to rush them to defeat the boss quicker or more safely. All things considered, the dance battles are a polarizing mechanic, but one that gives the game its own flair fitting of its source material. To narrow the analysis back to the bosses themselves, their actual biggest drawback is how taunting, the game's other, quieter standout mechanic, is effectively useless during most of them, as Jack will just look silly flinging the soul robber around at these enemies. They really couldn't care less about it. Due to these limitations and the limited moveset in general, these encounters can feel a little more style than substance at times. Even still, there are some standouts for sure. The spider boss splitting apart into smaller copies when damaged, getting faster and more aggressive with each one stamped out, Lock, Shock, and Barrel challenging the player to manage a horde of enemies in addition to their attacks, Dr. Finkelstein, who forgoes the traditional smack until death approach the other bosses take, requiring you to yank his bolted head open and replace the fake evil brain Oogie forced on him with his own. This fight is the only one to feature a song not from the original film, which adds to its unconventionality. The game has a lot of these to offer and spaces them out really well across its 24 chapters, always leaving a dramatic battle for the player to look forward to in anticipation of hearing their favorite songs from the film recreated and recontextualized. Also recontextualized by the necessity of transforming the setting of an 80-minute movie and refitting it for an 8 to 10 hour game are the districts of Halloween Town and other locations Jack visits in The Nightmare Before Christmas. As a follow-up and companion to the original film, Oogie's Revenge chooses not to attempt adapting the stop-motion aesthetic of the film given the limited hardware of the time and the no doubt ages it would take to recreate such an iconic style within a notoriously difficult and tedious to work with medium. Instead, it focuses its efforts on recapturing its atmosphere through its musical score, sound design, and voice actors and environments. The tracks that float in when Jack is just walking around the levels are fantastic background noise, often making use of instrumentation and melodies appropriated from the film or just straight up reusing the film score with slight alterations. The battle themes, on the other hand,
it's too embarrassing to talk about.
The repetition of just 1 or 2 songs for every battle is an ageless criticism for stylish action games, though in other titles they typically use original songs composed with the intention of getting the player excited and losing themselves in the fight. With enough battles, the soundtrack eventually starts to fade in the player's mind and can provide a sense of urgency and help them focus. Oogie's Revenge take on this trope is to use This Is Halloween and Making Christmas, altered to Take Our Town Back, fitting the second half of the game, in every confrontation. Songs created for completely different purposes in the story they were written to serve, one introducing the setting and the other directly forwarding the story, both intense ensemble numbers and neither easy to tune out. Hearing the town chant at the start of every encounter, often while just walking around and obstructing the soothing orchestral background music, is almost as egregious as the infamous da 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 from Sonic Unleashed. Not a glowing review of the soundtrack overall, but generally the game's use of music is spot on and evocative of the setting without being egregious. Some of the more original tracks are great too, it's just difficult to ignore intrusive battle themes when 60 to 70% of the game is based on combat. Speaking of the combat, Jack's moveset is expanded as the game progresses, with him donning the Pumpkin King and Santa Jack costumes, which can be swapped to on the fly. These possess a sort of fire and ice, offense and defense relationship that adds to Jack's arsenal. Pumpkin Jack has access to powerful fire attacks which penetrate enemies' guards and blow away entire hordes at the cost of red souls, and Santa Jack lays immobilizing traps and is unable to attack directly or inflict damage at all. Jack himself doesn't get any additional weapons or very many attacks, so these costumes add some much needed variety and serve unique functions outside of attacking with the Soul Robber. Being able to blast through enemies with an overpowered AoE is invaluable for tougher fights and for scoring faster time rankings in the chapters, and the presence can, in theory, make tougher enemies more manageable and make building up the player's exclamation mark count even quicker and safer. Plus, Santa Jack feels the need to shout out Merry Christmas every time you throw a present, which just really makes you feel like Santa Claus. These alternate forms, for as welcome an addition as they are and for as heavily they are featured on the game's box, feels severely underdeveloped compared to what Jack can manage with just the Soul Robber. The player can buy additional trap types for Santa Jack at the shop, but all of them, with the exception of an easy mode exclusive shield present, can only temporarily freeze or stun enemies in place, making them all feel quite samey. The default trap reverting enemies back to their weaker, non-taunted states is fairly unique and helpful though. The destructive Pumpkin King is limited by the aforementioned red souls, which is fitting for how powerful it can be, but the only way of acquiring these are by random enemy drops, or more commonly, trudging all the way back to the witch's shop to purchase more or upgrade your capacity. This means the player could potentially be going entire chapters without a refill. Besides, having only 2 attacks means there isn't much room for experimentation even with the necessary funds. Worst of all, neither form can make effective use of the game's most unique combat mechanic, the taunts. Both forms are capable of taunting enemies and even have unique animations, but unlike the Soul Robber getting an instant charge, neither Santa Jack nor the Pumpkin King get any immediate gameplay reward for pulling off the action successfully. Perhaps enhancing your next trap to be larger or more potent and granting some additional red souls respectively could have been some interesting applications to make sticking with these costumes more rewarding. As it stands, their implementation ends up feeling limp, the garments acting more as power-ups than full-fledged accessories to Jack's moveset. Pumpkin Jack does have a Stone Cold walk animation though.
Oh yeah, he's got like a sexier swagger. This is the straight side of him.
While the costumes are a bit disappointing, the game's commitment to recreating the atmosphere of the movie is impressive, especially given the near decade-long time gap between the two. The bulk of the original voice cast returning is an obvious benefit, none of which give an awful or half-assed performance. Randy Crenshaw as Mr. Hyde is a surprising standout, who acts as the traveling save system of the game and was given all of the most memorable lines.
Record your story so it's not lost. Don't forget.
Save it now, or risk doing it again.
The fountain area also acts as a hub where the player can heal and refill the consumable and extremely useful crystal bottle items with the fountain water. Every area connects back to the town square, sometimes in surprising ways that show a fair amount of thought gone into designing the game world. This desire to keep playing and see what comes next is important because the game's progression is, frankly, unequivocally its worst aspect, and there honestly isn't even any competition. Like the earlier Devil May Cry games, the world is designed so that locations are always accessible so long as you have the necessary key item to unlock it. The game is divided into linear chapters, with Jack needing to completely finish one area before getting a key or an NPC appearing to unlock the next, but previous locations are available and often necessary to revisit after clearing them. This, combined with the occasional shoddy direction and weird NPC dialogue, means the player can end up wandering in an area they've already beaten and revisiting places fruitlessly, hoping to forward the story, though there's nothing left for them save for perhaps some extra collectibles, figurines, and health upgrades and the like. Irritating enough on its own, wandering the narrow streets and graveyards and pumpkin patches and otherworldly sketchbook purgatory dreamscapes aimlessly is made worse when you remember the game is constantly grading you on how long Jack takes to drag himself over the chapter's finish line. Prepare for a lot of D ranks for time on your first playthrough.
You're slow.
Visiting the Witch's Shop in Halloween Town, the only location in the game to purchase essential items and upgrades, compounds the issue and can prevent the player from obtaining upgrades with their hard-earned souls without having to force Jack down a walk of shame back to the main hub. No divinity statues dotting the map like in DMC, or portable access to the shop. I mean, this was 2004, it was before, everyone had a smartphone, so it's kind of forgivable, I guess. These issues of vague direction and backtracking compound in what is the game's absolute lowest moment.
Oh, it's embarrassing to talk about.
Jack enters a new area and is met with an out-of-control clown rocketing down streets and begging for someone to stop him. Tall Witch, legal name, informs the player to stop Clown as he holds the key to the next room. The area is small, so it isn't hard to notice Clown is on a fixed path, and the scenario occurs right after unlocking Santa Jack, which lets you set and detonate traps to immobilize enemies. So, the player tosses a trap in the way of Clown and detonates it. This seems to work until he blasts off and bowls Jack over for good measure. Okay, you might think. The present worked, so I must have to do something else after Clown is stunned. So you fruitlessly cycle through every move Jack can perform, attacking Clown, trying to grab and rip the rocket off of Clown's wheel, setting him on fire. All futile. What gives? The game hasn't given you any reason to believe you don't already possess the means of saving Clown. Until the player gets frustrated, goes back to the witch and uncovers a new line of dialogue instructing Jack to go back to Dr. Finkelstein's lab, the literal preceding area, to get a tool to bring back and awkwardly use once Clown is stunned to free him. Not only is the solution not communicated until after you are made to waste your time, it stacks needless backtracking on top to perpetuate this redundant scenario even further. The only incentive to do this, aside from the forced mandatory progression, is getting access to the game's second secret chapter, the second of two, a pointless rematch against the spider boss beaten several levels ago with no added depth or challenge. The game progression isn't all doom and gloom though. While the enemy variety could certainly benefit from a few more shady monsters tossed into the mix, the game is shockingly competent at feeding the player with helpings of new areas and scenarios all the way to the end credits, from the smoldering and claustrophobic Oogie's lair to the ethereal hinterlands, whose stark sketchbook-inspired woods bleed off the screen, to the cheery and bustling Christmas town. Exploring all of the Nightmare Before Christmas, areas both original and lovingly recreated from the film, framed with the dynamic fixed camera angles DMC and Resident Evil were known for at the time, makes the journey worthwhile, at least for a first playthrough. Rescuing Sally, the mayor, and the rest of the bunch and unifying their efforts to restore their home and gear up to take down Oogie genuinely feels good to see, even if they don't end up contributing much besides cutscene fodder and a quiz with a mind-scrambling number of potential questions. None of that colorful set dressing is to distract from the fact that Oogie's Revenge is, proudly, a video game first and foremost, and not content simply smacking the player upside the head with the nostalgia hammer until the credits roll. When a game pulls you aside to give you a report card and an allowance at the end of each level, it's fair to say it expects you to engage with the mechanics first and foremost, not for you to forget you're playing a video game and pine to watch the movie instead. As it builds to its conclusion with another confrontation with the gambling boogeyman, holiday doors collected and finally returned, a train destruction and Santa rescue.
Oh no! I think Santa Claus just died.
Jack is pitted once more against a gigantic Oogie Boogie bloated by a fiendish desire to rule over all 7 of the holiday worlds, and a shit ton of bugs. The battle itself is serviceable, making use of environmental hazards and multiple levels in the arena to encourage a bit more thought in Jack's positioning and attacks, but all the glory is earned through the ultimate rhythm battle. The show-stopping remix of Oogie's theme song delivers on the rivalry built upon over the entire game in all its orchestral glory. A fiery duet between a power-hungry creature of shadow oozing as much with narcissism as the insects which give him life, and a noble Jack Skellington fighting and dancing to keep his friends and his home safe. And maybe with a bit of his own reputation to prove as well.
And now you're tall. It makes it all the more worthwhile to see a giant fall.
In retrospect, this game may represent the only way a follow-up to Nightmare Before Christmas could really exist without sacrificing all artistic intent or integrity. Changing the medium forced the developers to consider how the tone, atmosphere, the vibes, if you will, of the claymation classic could be captured in a video game where its mostly pacifistic protagonist has to beat hundreds of skeletons to death with Nickelodeon slime. And they answered with the remixed lyrics of classic songs, having the boss fights transform into dramatic rhythm game showdowns, and skillfully taking advantage of Jack's outgoing and offbeat personality to transform him into a cheeky, stylish action protagonist on a journey to save the very setting players have already come to love. Jack can inspect elements of the environment and give his thoughts on most of it. Even when it's not that humorous, it still adds to the character of the game world. The developers used the game as a vehicle for creating mostly fun mechanics and made it simple enough at the onset to try to appeal to people who may not be that familiar with games at all. It's the fact that the game is a game that shields it from criticism of being a pretty half-baked sequel to a movie whose plot was already not its strongest asset. Beating chapters with at least an A in each category and clearing the game with high enough average rankings unlocks figures to view and costumes for further replays, acting as incentives for pursuing a higher skill level, the costumes in particular being a pretty great reward. In addition to unlockables, the tougher Nightmare difficulty acts as an optional challenge. But are the mechanics deep enough to make that journey towards mastery worthwhile on their own merits? Normally performing a full combo or any of Jack's empowered attacks consumes the Soul Robber's buff after a charge. However, cancelling a combo string into one of the Soul Robber's other actions lets you reap the benefits of both before having to charge again. Santa Jack's trap presents are detonated with the left trigger, which has no other function anywhere else in the game. This means you can freely switch to either of Jack's other forms and still detonate the trap, giving you some extra flexibility and basically saving the Santa costume from being completely superfluous. The combo ranking only takes into account your longest combo in any single combat encounter rather than a combo average like in most DMC games. This means the player only needs to build a long combo once per chapter for the S rank, and can afford to use Pumpkin Jack to blast through smaller fights and make quicker work of bosses for that improved time ranking. This is less hidden tech and more just a general tip, but Jack's Soul Spin can really rack up the combat counter with proper positioning and reflects incoming projectiles, most of the time, which makes it pretty versatile. It can also draw in out-of-range souls and notes, which saves you frivolously using Jack's dodge to sweep them out of the air. The empowered version can even pull in enemies and deal some major damage. It's super powerful, use it. The quiz with Corpse Kid is the hardest part of the game to nail, but also super charming. There must be 3 dozen questions of varying difficulty here. It's great. While there is enough here to learn over the course of a few playthroughs to keep the player entertained, there's a fair bit of jank in there as well. Redoing the boss fights becomes a chore rather than an accessory to the other combat mechanics, as the rhythm games never change. The targeting system can be unwieldy, making it difficult to pull off fancy moves without attacking the whole crowd of enemies, and yeah, that backtracking and pacing is kind of a killer. Navigation issues do remedy themselves over time, especially in a game with a small world like this one. It is designed to be replayed, and the more frustrating elements of the world design fade away, but it's still memorization for the sake of a combat system that, while fun to master in its own right, still feels half-baked in some areas. There's a lot to appreciate with Oogie's Revenge even 20 years after the fact. The harsh to mixed critical reception is reminiscent of other decent to good licensed titles of the era like Battle for Bikini Bottom. Like SpongeBob, Jack Skellington stars in a title that is definitely not the peak of its genre, but emulates the big guys with enough of its own pumpkin spice mixed in there to set it apart while offering an interactive world for fans of the movie to enjoy. Fan appeal only goes so far though for a game now twice as old as the film it was based on at the time of its release. In 2024, it's pretty obvious Oogie's Revenge doesn't really have much goodwill going for it other than its novelty. It's a bizarre mishmash of concepts and game mechanics created to capture the offbeat energy of a cult classic animated musical. The level design and pacing were considered archaic even for the time. Fans passionate about the film, but perhaps less so for perfecting their fighting techniques and getting all S's on their report card, would likely enjoy its charming aspects, but quietly drop it after getting fed up wandering its restrictive levels and growing bored with the simplistic appearance of the combat. For hardcore action gamers, if their available well of games for a niche genre have dried up, it's definitely worth a couple goes, but won't offer as much to the player as these genres' peaks. Oogie's Revenge is the lesser of 2 cakes. But hey, who's really gonna say no to a bit of extra cake? Jack is. He's a skeleton, he doesn't really eat much. Come on, gay boy, put some meat on those bones. Might I offer you some jelly?
Oh, wonderful!
All right, is this thing on? Testing. Thank you everyone so much who made it this far in the video. If you did, I assume you enjoyed it, or at least, tolerated the sound of my voice, so thanks for that. This is the first video I've made in this style, so there's definitely, some little kinks I'm still ironing out, particularly in the voiceover and stuff like that, but hey, it was fun. It was a good time. I hope everyone liked it. If you enjoyed it and you want to, let me know, go ahead and leave a like or a comment or even a sub. I have some more video ideas in the tank. This was supposed to be kind of the first of, not a series, but just like there's other games and other game-related stuff I want to talk about at some point. My turnover rate is not very fast. I do work a full-time job, but it'll happen eventually. Some games I want to talk about are like Bloodborne, Resident Evil stuff, probably some more like niche indie games, 3D platformers, stuff like that. I got a pretty wide palette. I'm sure we'll get around to all that sometime. I did record the footage for this game on my Twitch channel, which will be linked below. I still stream there pretty regularly, usually once a week, so if you're interested in that, maybe I'll play this game on the harder difficulty at some point. I did want this video to be the kind of like definitive Nightmare Before Christmas Oogie's Revenge video. I'm definitely not the first YouTuber who covered this game. Took a lot of inspiration from Gaming Brits video, which is like 9 years old at this point or something crazy like that. And I did want to address a couple more things just in the addendum here that I cut out of the video or just was still, working on at the time of recording and putting it all together. First things first, so I did mention earlier in this video towards the beginning that this is a in-house Capcom game by one of their side teams, and I do believe that's true. Some of the development history is really tricky to find for older games, especially like older licensed games. And there's also this weird discrepancy on the Wikipedia page that says this game was developed by Toze. Now Toze, if you don't know, which I don't know why you would, they're basically a ghost developer that made a bunch of games in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. They're still around today, but they made games for Nintendo and Capcom and a bunch of other companies as well, and they are kind of known for, at least according to Wikipedia, for not adding any creative input and basically just being a developer for hire who does what they're told. Now, Toze did certainly make the GBA Nightmare Before Christmas game. It's not called Oogie's Revenge, it's called something else. I'm not looking at it right now, I don't care that much about it. I used one song from it in this video though. They did almost certainly develop that game. They were known more for handheld titles as far as I can tell, but for some reason, I think someone got the wires crossed when they were editing like the Wikipedia page for this game and the other Nightmare Before Christmas game, because they have the developers listed as Toze for the console version that we played, and I don't think that's correct based on some names cross-referenced in the credits, names who, again, if you saw Gaming Brits video ages ago, he pointed out that some of those names went on to be in the credits of games like DMC4 and Bayonetta, so I assume that these are full-time Capcom employees, or were at least at the time. Bayonetta's not a Capcom game, but you know what I mean. So I think that's just error. I don't know. I don't think that's correct. Again, it's hard to check for sure. Maybe they had something to do with the development, like maybe parts of it were handled by Toze, but it doesn't seem that way. The other elephant in the room I wanted to cover after the fact is my experience going back and S-ranking this game. I did say earlier in the video that it was worth a couple of goes, I think was the exact wording I used. So I do want to comment now that I've finally S-ranked the game. Let's get that footage up on there showing, hell yeah, all S ranks every level. Let's go. Very cool. There is also another difficulty level, the Nightmare difficulty. From what I played, it didn't really seem super worth the time. It just kind of seems to make enemies a little bit more aggressive and makes them deal double damage, which if you're looking for a tougher challenge, it's definitely there. But once you get into the rhythm of what you need to do to get an S rank in this game, it felt pretty similar to how I was playing the game before. It didn't really feel like it was mixing it up that much, but I needed to learn some tricks like looping taunts or the trap presence to build up the exclamation mark counters. You stay out of danger and kind of just like rack those up. If you get a few enemies in a pile, you can kind of just like trigger them one after the other and really build up that counter without risking too much of your health, and do it like in a timely fashion too. There's just a lot of shortcuts you kind of need to balance between time and not taking damage and just like, yeah, hitting that exclamation mark count. And juggling all that was pretty fun. I stand by that most of the chapters were satisfying to S-rank. I did discover something about halfway through replaying the game, which is that the S-ranks actually take your highest ranking for each individual category when calculating whether or not you've S-ranked a chapter. So, for example, on one playthrough, which is what I ended up doing, I played each level through, and got an S rank in each category all in one go. So that means S rank time, S rank exclamation mark, S rank damage, and combo. That's what it is, combo ranking. Getting all those. But if you wanted to, you could kind of cheese it a little bit by doing them kind of one at a time. So like you could do one run through the level where you just blast through it and you get hit a ton of times. You don't really build up your combo or anything like that, and get an S rank on time, and then replay it actually going a bit slower and doing all the taunting you need to and doing all the combos you need to in order to hit the top S rank threshold for each individual category. So you can kind of cheese it that way, which is a little bit, it takes a little bit of the wind out of the sails, because that does mean that you can kind of cheat what the game's highest achievement is, but you still do get ranked S only at the end of the level if you S rank each category. So if you need those extra souls, or if you're going for the figures, which you need at least an A in each ranking on one playthrough, then you still need to like learn the level a bit and get, you know, pretty good at it, even if the A ranks are more lenient than the S ranks. If you're curious, Runaway Clown and Hinterlands Part 1 were the worst levels to S rank. Those levels took me like more than half a dozen tries, and that's annoying. Replaying the same level over and over again, like a few times to learn it is fine, but when it gets to like, you know, you're approaching 10, it's a little bit anxiety inducing. It's a little bit annoying. Yeah, and that's about all I wanted to say. So once again, if you want to subscribe, I'm gonna come out with more videos eventually, not necessarily anytime soon, but hopefully soon. And yeah, I do stream regularly, and you know, I think if you like this game, you'll probably like some of the other games I play over on there, so it's worth checking out. One more final thank you for if you actually sat through all this, and I plan on making more, so thank you so much.